นะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. When the Buddha attained parinibbana, meaning when he left his 5 khandhas, his body and mind, and had no more birth, no more becoming, no more birth. He did leave us one thing, he left us the gift of Dhamma, which he pointed out is the highest gift you can give. Giving the gift of Dhamma is giving people the chance to understand themselves better, improve their lives, and ultimately free themselves from suffering. And the Buddha practiced that Dhamma, the Dhamma that he taught all the way through his life, right, literally right to the last breath, the last moment of his life. So we know from the text that 3 months prior to his parinibbana, he announced that he would be going to die within 3 months' time. So he knew that his death was approaching, as some people do when they're told by a doctor that they're terminally ill. But for those 3 months, the Buddha didn't let that thought, the thought of his approaching death, cause him stress or suffering. They say he was fully mindful right to the end of his life. His mind was unshaken by fear, worry, anxiety about his own approaching death. Because he had no more attachment to the khandhas, to this body, to the sense of self. So for the Buddha, death didn't mean the loss of anything. Death was just the natural culmination of life, and the fact that a human body doesn't last forever, doesn't work forever. He was fully aware of that. Even though he was 80 years old, he was still relatively physically fit and active, even though he had pain and discomfort, dukkha vedana, had illness. He was still walking, and he walked to the place where he finally entered parinibbana, Kushinara. And the day of his death, he had the lay people prepare a platform for him. He was living at that time. Kusinara was run by the Malla people, and so the king of the Mallas prepared him a platform for him to lie down, because he was obviously very weak at the end. And the monks cleaned it and prepared it, and then the Buddha lay down, and they say he lay down in the classic reclining pose, the lion's posture, where he had his left leg on his right leg. He was lying down on his right shoulder with his right hand supporting his head. But fully mindful, fully aware, even though he was very weak, and he lay there in that classic pose with the monks around him for his final hours. And because he was mindful, even though he had increasing dukkha vedana, painful feeling, it didn't shake him. He wasn't writhing around, tossing around. He maintained his posture with samadhi, with patience and endurance, and with insight that the dukkha vedana of the body was not self. So he practiced what he taught. He lived the practice right to the last breath. He was mindful. His mind was clear, pure, unshaken by events, even the events of a dying body. And he died, after a night of a lot of pain, but just mindfully observing the rising, passing away of that dukkha vedana. He eventually died just before dawn. Ajahn Chah, our teacher, was similar. He had a terrible last night of his life, terrible, painful experience of the body dying. He was taken to the hospital, Ubon Hospital, and everybody was aware that probably it was the end. After many occasions during his last 10 years of his life when he was seriously ill, there were many kind of false alerts where people thought he might die, but he didn't. But I think at the end everybody realized it was the end. So in the middle of the night, the doctors were doing their best for him, but his internal organs were packing up. He's very weak pulse, weak heartbeat. And the doctors in the hospital wanted him to stay on, and they probably would have been wanting to administer morphine and painkillers and so on. But the monks decided better to take him back to the monastery, which is where he usually was through his illness, with the knowledge that leaving the hospital probably meant he wouldn't last more than a few hours. So they took him back to the kuti in the forest where he normally stayed, laid him down on his bed, paid respects, and just waited. And little by little his body became weaker and weaker. But they were aware that he had great pain and discomfort, but he wasn't, as usual, he wasn't displaying suffering with the pain of the body. And the monks who were with him said there was even a point maybe between 1 or 2 a.m. when he was in extreme pain, but he opened his eyes, indicating he was still conscious. And they even thought that was a teaching. And you can never be sure because he wasn't speaking, but most of the time he had his eyes closed those final days. But at that moment he opened the eyes and looked at the monks who were with him, as if to say, I'm still aware of what's going on and I'm not attached. And then just before dawn he passed away, and the monks with him said it was rather like a candle burning down to the base and just quietly going out. All the vital signs gradually disappeared until they stopped and his breathing stopped. But it was very peaceful. So again, like his teacher, the Buddha, he was mindful to the end and unfazed, unswayed by the painful feelings his body was experiencing. And something that the Buddha taught and that Ajahn Chah always emphasized is the reliance on the practice of patient endurance through our life, through our practice. Kanti paramang tapo titika. Patient endurance is the highest destroyer or incinerator of defilements, our craving and our attachment, the causes of suffering. Patience weakens the defilements. Patience burns them up like rubbish on a bonfire. It's not the only quality we need for the practice, but it's a vital quality, an essential quality. And it has this effect to weaken the effect of greed, anger, delusion, our attachment to self, our delusion of self. The practice of patience weakens it, especially at those times when it manifests strongly. So when we're ill or injured or facing aging and the sickness and the end of our life, those are times where you see the real value of the practice of patience. Because there are times when the mind is easily upset, swayed by the experience of the body because of attachment to the body. When the body is in pain, then the mind becomes in pain as well, and we suffer from mental agitation, worry, fear, anxiety. We writhe about, we mentally writhe about and physically writhe about. But the practice of patience helps us to calm the mind and the body at that time. It kind of provides a basis for developing mindfulness and then wisdom, insight into our situation and what's going on. So it has this, the practice of patience has this quality of just weakening the strong defilements that lead us to be stressed and suffer. So it's something we have to cultivate consciously. It's a practice, the practice of patience, bringing it up, because mental defilements are the opposite. Mental defilements rooted in greed, anger, delusion are what agitate the mind, make us impatient, make karma that comes back to us, causes us more pain and suffering when we make negative, harmful karma. But patience in the face of physical pain, mental pain, difficulties, external conditions that are unpleasant, undesirable, when faced with patience, it minimizes our tendency towards making bad karma or following the mental defilements. Learning to be patient with our own moods, our own thoughts, our own mental agitation. And learning to be patient with the world around us, the conditions of the world which are beyond our control. The Buddha said this is the supreme destroyer of mental defilements, meaning it's one of your best friends in the practice. You can always be more patient with the situation. It doesn't mean being inactive or passive. It's a quality that we have to consciously bring up, and it can be quite hard work. But it's useful because it takes the sting out of greed, anger, delusion that are prompted or provoked by different situations. Without patience, what's the mind like? Well, it's all over the place, agitated, following its every thought, every desire, good and bad, following every thought, every mental state, not peaceful, not at ease. And often that leads us into making karma through speech, through action, breaking the precepts perhaps. The Buddha compared patience to like the earth, the earth that we're sitting on right now, that wherever you are, your building that you're in is built on the earth. But the earth never wavers, never complains, whatever you do to it. You throw rubbish on it, make it into landfill, you urinate on it, you do anything to it, good or bad, the earth remains stable. So that's the picture, the image the Buddha gave us for developing the quality of patience, because life and the world and these 5 khandhas that we have, that we're born with, bring us a lot of pain and difficulty, whether we like it or not, and we can't buy our way out of that or force our way out of it, control our way out of that. It's part of the package of being born as a human being, is that we have a body and then a mind, and this mind is sensitive. And we feel and we think and we experience different moods and we experience different feelings, pleasure and pain. So the khandhas, they say, are difficult to bear with because they don't always do what we want. We don't always get the pleasure we want, get things our own way. We don't get every wish fulfilled. And quite often we're getting what we don't want. We get pain, discomfort, illness, injury, aches and pains. We have to put up with negative sense impressions, unpleasant sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. We have to put up with our own frustrated desires. We want something and we don't get it. So we have discontent. Having 5 khandhas requires patience because they're difficult to put up with. It's like having 5 naughty children that you have to look after. You have no choice because they're only children, so you have to look after them. But they're not listening to you and they're running all over the place, causing all kinds of mischief and trouble. It's tiring, thankless task. And that's your 5 khandhas every day. They're giving you all kinds of problems. But the real problem is not the khandhas. They are just what they are. Their nature is that. Their nature is to be subject to change and dukkha. And that change means they're constantly degenerating, changing. They're not fixed and they can't bring us permanent, lasting happiness. But that's just their nature. The real problem is the mind that foolishly grasps them as self, takes ownership. You don't have to have these 5 khandhas in your mind with a sense of self. We're either seeing them that they belong to us or that we are within them. One of these views is present when we're not clear, when we're not clearly seeing the way things are. The mind is somehow or other forms the view that these 5 khandhas are self, and so we suffer. But the Buddha didn't have that view. So the khandhas were just the khandhas. The body was just the body, feelings just the feelings, perceptions, thoughts, just thoughts and perceptions. So he had that clarity of insight right to the last day of his life. Ajahn Chah the same. So even though the body was in pain and facing death, mentally no suffering. And that's the highest happiness, the happiness of non-attachment, the mind that is empty of the khandhas, with the khandhas but not attaching to them or identifying with them, with the world but not attaching to it. This is ultimately it's a state that's difficult to describe in words, impossible to describe in words. We can only skirt around the edges of it by saying the unconditioned, or we say emptiness, empty of suffering, empty of self, the unborn, the uncreated. These words are just kind of pointing to it, but it's the mind that is well trained in this eightfold noble path, to the point where it has clear knowledge and vision of the way things are, that these khandhas are not to be grasped at as self, because they're suffering. If you see that clearly, then you don't want to grasp at what is suffering. You tire of that. You tire of reacting with suffering to the pleasures and pains of the body and the mind, grasping the pleasures and resisting and rejecting the pains. You get tired of all that because it's never ending, it's endless. And the craving, the attachment that it conditions and supports is endless. And that's why we feel so tired mentally day by day. It's because the mind keeps coming back to more craving, wanting more, bigger, better, different, and getting rid of what we don't want. We're always planning the next move, always wanting the next thing, or wanting to get rid of the thing we don't want. Never quiet, never feeling complete, never feeling at peace. That's the mind of craving and attachment. But the mind of the path, Magga, the Eightfold Path, is gradually going in the other direction. It's going to the seeing clearly the way things are, and remedying that, all that mental agitation to the point where it just knows there's nothing to be grasped at as self in the end. But the empty mind is still there with the khandhas. It's not like you don't have a body and a mind while you're still alive. Even the Buddha still had his body there, lying on that bed before he died, in the lion's posture. He still had a body, he still had feelings, he could still think and talk and feel, but the mind was empty of self, empty of grasping. So it knew the khandhas, but it didn't grasp at them or cling to them. So it was a peace, so as if separate. So the Buddha once talked about one of his previous lives as Bodhisattva, the king Mahachanaka, who one day was going out for a trip with his retinue. He was on the royal elephant going through the land, and there's a park, and in this park they had some mango trees, a mango grove, and there was one beautiful looking mango tree full of ripe looking mangoes, but the king had business to attend to, so he going along on his elephant, he's looking back at it and he thought, those mangoes look good, and his staff said, yeah, they're probably the best mangoes in the kingdom. So he thought, okay, on the way back we'll get some, hoping to enjoy the nice taste of fresh mangoes. So off they went to do their business, and on the return journey they came and they found that mango tree was completely wrecked. All the mangoes had been picked and all the branches and leaves were trashed, and there was debris all over the ground, and the tree looked in a sorry state. And the king was surprised or shocked at what happened. So his staff said, well, these delicious mangoes are so popular, all the villagers came out and raided it while you were gone. And at first the king was disappointed, upset. But he was looking at the way the tree had got totally trashed and thinking, it's a bit of a sorry state. Having had these mangoes, this is what happens. It attracts people, and then they want the mangoes, and in the process of getting the mangoes, they destroy everything. But you notice nearby was another mango tree of a similar size. Healthy, nice leaves, good branches, looking really good, but no mangoes. And he had an insight that if you have no mangoes, you stay healthy and happy and peaceful. Once you've got mangoes, you've got something that people want, so they come and compete and fight and destroy everything to get them. So he's reflecting that on having something, having an attachment or attaching to something brings suffering. If there's no suffering, if there's no attachment, then it's like the mango tree without mangoes. It remains at peace, peacefully growing, undamaged. Mind is like that. As soon as we grasp and attach to things, the mind starts to get damaged because it's a cause for greed, desire, jealousy, competition, ego, aversion, rage, guilt, and so on. Once you grasp at things, you suffer. If there's no grasping, then the khandhas are just the khandhas. They're like the empty mango tree. They're just at peace. They are what they are. They're still painful, but you don't grasp at the pain or attach to it as self. So your mind is unharmed. This is why the Buddha taught us to practice non-attachment and letting go, is because he was trying to help us to live in this world without getting harmed by it, which is a big call, but it's something that can be done. Human beings can do it. The Buddha did it, Rinpoche did it, and many others have done it since the time of the Buddha. So non-attachment to the world doesn't mean destroying the world, annihilation, and getting rid of it through aversion. Tiring of the world doesn't mean turning against it with aversion and just wanting to destroy it. That's still a form of attachment, isn't it? Sometimes people mistakenly think in that way. Maybe they have a lot of suffering and they think the way out of suffering is just destroy everything. That might lead them to want to commit suicide or destroy their enemy or destroy everything around them. That just creates more attachment, more confusion, more suffering. Doesn't end it. The Buddha's way to the real ending of suffering, the real caring for your mind, looking after it to the point where it really is free from suffering, comes through developing this Eightfold Path: Sila, Samadhi, Panya, clarity, insight, peace of mind. And when we contemplate and see the way things are, the mind naturally turns away from attachment, but not through aversion or wanting to destroy, but just clearly knowing and seeing the way things are. The body is merely a body, collection of physical elements that come together that can't stay together forever. The body ages. It's also vulnerable to sickness, infection, as we know. But even without illness and viruses and so on, it's subject to aging and degeneration. But it's merely what it is. To let go of the body doesn't mean to destroy the body. In the time of the Buddha, some people thought that. Even maybe today some people think that. So they do all kinds of ascetic practices, fasting, going without sleep, and standing on one leg, lying on beds of nails and so on, thinking that somehow by punishing the body and causing pain, they'll drive out the attachment and end the karma of a body. It doesn't. The Buddha said it's pointless. What ends the karma of the body, in the sense, what ends the attachment to the body, is mindfulness and wisdom, clarity. And when we're clearly seeing the way things are, the mind naturally turns away from grasping and attachment. It's just a natural result of seeing clearly the way things are. And whatever part of the body or mind you look at, that will be true. So the physical body, the more you investigate it, come to see that it is impermanent, unsatisfying, is without self, then the mind just naturally lets go, little by little. It'll keep letting go until eventually it won't grasp or identify with the body at all. Seeing the body as imperfect, seeing the body as impermanent, seeing it as a cause of suffering because of the illness and the pain, seeing the unattractiveness of the body. Ultimately it is not something that you can maintain as beautiful and healthy. While you have beauty and health, that's good, and that's your good karma, but it won't last forever. And that's the insight. This doesn't last forever. Therefore, no point grasping at it. Feelings are the same. As you get older, the amount of dukkha vedana increases. The aches and pains increase. That's just the way it is. But if you establish mindfulness and you practice patience and you keep looking at that, investigating the mind that likes to identify with feeling, you realize ultimately it shouldn't be grasped at as self. Feeling comes through its own sets of causes and conditions. Ultimately, you can't stop painful feelings arise. We try to minimize them or distract ourselves from them, but that's no real ultimate escape. It's only temporary. So you notice, this is what we're learning in meditation. You notice the mind's habit of seeking distraction to get away from painful feeling. Whether it's an itch or an ache and pain in your muscles or your back or your neck or a headache. When you're meditating, you'll notice how you're trying to establish mindfulness and the mind doesn't want to experience pain, so it runs away into fantasy, imagination. And all of our life we're doing that, not just in meditation, but you learn to see it and recognize what's going on in meditation. We're always looking for distraction. And this again is where patience helps. The more patience you develop, the endurance, the resilience, then you can see those movements of the mind, but you don't just follow them every time. You just notice and let go rather than follow the desire for distraction and end up fantasizing, and usually after fantasizing we end up falling asleep. Or maybe just go straight to sleepiness. It's a huge problem people have when meditating is the experience of the mind or the body at that time is not very gratifying, so they just go to dullness and sleepiness, numbness. Better than nothing, just get away in that sense. Sometimes it's too painful to be mindful. To bring up mindfulness is painful, but it's not actually the mindfulness that is painful, it's the objects of mind that you're becoming aware of are painful, but your mindfulness isn't yet strongly established, so your mind keeps grasping at the pain and reacting with aversion, so you don't like it. So rather than being mindful, go to sleep is easier. So if not sleep, then we go to distraction. We do this all the way through our day, don't we? When we're working and we're getting bored or things are not going well, we start daydreaming about what we're going to do later, or when we're going to get another job, or when we retire and go on our cruise around the world, or whatever it is that we fantasize about. Probably the most common thing is sex, isn't it? All the surveys say the average person at work might be thinking of a sexual fantasy every 10 minutes on average. I don't know how they work it out, but that's just the mind trying to run away and satisfy itself away from the pain of the present moment. It doesn't work. Not long and you're back with the pain again. Better to go to mindfulness. Establish the mindfulness and just know pain as it truly is. In painful feelings, unpleasant mental states, painful memories are just what they are. Memories, thoughts, feelings that arise, pass away. They're impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self, not to be grasped at as self. This is what mindfulness and investigation of the Dhamma reveals to us. It takes the mind to a higher place so we can transcend it. It takes practice, and with that practice we need the patience, the resilience to be with ourselves. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is just to be with yourself, let alone be with other people. Being with yourself is hard work because this body and mind gives us pain. That's its nature, it's not perfect. One of our fantasies is to want some kind of eternal heaven realm. We go there when we die and there's no pain, nothing happens at all, it's all bliss. And you may achieve that for a while, but it's not permanent. And you still come back from that realm. Just as within this life, we seek out different kinds of bliss. The coarsest kind, maybe intoxicating drink and drugs and things that bring us temporary blissful relief from our painful experiences, but they don't last. Or maybe we work harder to attain states of samadhi, which are certainly not to be sneered at or looked down on. But it's still the same dynamic. They don't last. The bliss of jhana and samadhi doesn't last, but it is a help. It's like a rest. The steadiness of the mind of samadhi helps us to let go of the coarser kinds of painful feelings, the coarser mental agitation. Helps us to let go of the temptation to break precepts, make bad karma. We develop a certain amount of inner contentment, satisfaction, which is invaluable in the practice, but it's not an end in itself. Even that we have to use as a stepping stone for developing clearer insight into the nature of these 5 khandhas. But it's not wrong to develop the peace, the bliss of samadhi, but just to be aware of its limitation. The Buddha himself would use samadhi, would develop the jhanas. So that night he died. Venerable Anuruddha was sitting watching the Buddha just before he died. What did the mind of the Buddha do? He had the divine eye, he could do that. So he said, the Buddha went through the 4 jhanas, from first, second, third to fourth, then back down to 1, and then out again. In jhana you can't speak, you can't communicate with the monks, people around you, but you can enter the jhana to purify your mindfulness, experience some bliss, some rest from your painful body, but to actually contemplate, you have to come out of your jhana and contemplate the nature of the khandhas, see them as anicca, dukkha, anatta. And that's why there's a danger when you do attain samadhi, you don't want to contemplate. You'd rather be blissful in that state of bliss. And why not? But it won't lead to nibbana until we develop wisdom, insight. And wisdom and insight, we don't have to wait until we've attained jhana to develop some insight into the nature of these khandhas. We just keep watching and observing them day by day, and you start to become a little wiser and a little more weary of that attachment. What the Buddha was teaching was a gradual training. It's very difficult to just, in one go, just become weary of all attachments and let them all go. We have to keep contemplating, and to do that we do need to develop a sense of well-being, a sense of inner peace, and that's why he encouraged us to develop precepts. Keep the precepts so we have a sense of being at ease with ourselves, we're not full of regrets, we're not worried about other people coming to get us and do things to us. We have that inner happiness of leading a moral life. And then to develop mindfulness and states of calm, because that also helps to bring a sense of inner well-being so we can continue contemplating the khandhas. If there's too much dukkha, too much stress, it's impossible to contemplate, isn't it? The mind is just too agitated, suffering too much. We have to find a skillful way to calm it down, and that's why we learn meditation. So it's something we have to keep returning to, developing mindfulness, calming the mind through meditation, but for contemplation, developing that insight into the way things are. So maybe tonight I'll just give you this much teaching and wish you all well in your practice. But for now I'll end the talk here.